Yep, this is Threat Modeling Redefined. Security teams goes on vacation. Don't know if you all came for the vacation part or the threat modeling part, but we'll talk about both. Quick disclaimer, I'll let you all read through it. I don't know if they just put it for my set of slides or if it was done for all the speakers, but yeah, have a quick read and then we'll get started. All right. Agenda, we're going to go threat modeling basics. I don't really want to dive deep into threat modeling, just because I think everyone sort of gets a sense of what threat modeling is. Just want to go through the basics so that we're on the same page. This is really about self-service threat modeling. It's a program that I rolled out at a company called Segment a number of years ago. And I wanted to re-talk about it because we got acquired by Twilio. The program didn't work nearly as well at Twilio, and I'll talk about what the challenges were and how I'm going to be fixing things at my new company. We'll do a deep dive on the program itself, and then we'll do a retrospective, what went well, what didn't go well, and so that you all know how to avoid those pitfalls. Who am I? I'm Jeevan Singh. I run the product security team at Rippling. I'm heavily involved in the AppSec community. I am a co-lead of OWASP Vancouver chapter. We also put together a OWASP conference in the Pacific Northwest called AppSec Days Pacific Northwest. It's happening in June in Vancouver this year. What I specialize is actually in scaling a security engineering program. So threat modeling is just one of the programs that I have scaled, but a number of them. Security teams are lean. We have to find ways how we can roll out programs across the entire organization. So those are the type of problems I love solving. All right. Threat modeling basics. Again, I don't want to really talk too much about threat modeling itself. I do want to just cover the basics so that we're all on the same page. The purpose of this talk is really self-service. So what is threat modeling? The main goal of threat modeling is to determine the assets in your system and how to protect it. And it's really pretty straightforward. The whole process in itself, you discover your assets, you look at the risks to those assets, you prioritize those risks, and then you figure out which ones you want to mitigate. Threat modeling itself should be fairly simple and straightforward. It should be transparent, and it should have everyone's voice. Everyone's voice is really important as a part of it. You want to make sure you're bringing the right diversity of folks. If you're threat modeling a system, you may want back-end engineers, front-end engineers. If it's a really sensitive area, you might want to bring in your incident response team or your InfraSec team, all that sort of stuff. So you want to make sure you have a diverse panel of folks that have come with different career options, backgrounds, because everyone looks at the system very differently, and they will provide good input. You make a very robust threat model with that. I always like to talk about why threat modeling is actually important. And most of the time, we all talk about shifting left and why that's important in itself. And threat modeling is pretty far left. It's in the design phase. And it's important because you can actually fix vulnerabilities before you write a single line of code. So it's very, very cheap. In general, it's very, very cheap because you only have to spend time with the individuals rather than once you discover a vulnerability in production, they might require architectural changes, which may cause months of development worry. I love assets and discovering assets. Sort of talked about how important assets are as a part of the threat modeling process. Usually, whenever I do threat modeling and we go through the whole process, we talk a lot about security, obviously, but we also, when we think about these assets, we talk about privacy, compliance. We also talk about general defects as a part of this process. So threat modeling doesn't have to be just limited to security, but you got all the right people in the room, you can talk about all the other important details for building systems. Threat modeling is perfect for prioritizing remediations. You cannot fix all of the things. So you want to figure out which things are important to your business, and you want to prioritize it and figure out where's the line in the sand on the things that you want to actually remediate. Having those conversations with engineering is very important. My personal favorite is documentation. I'm a security guy, so I love documents. Whenever I join organizations, first thing I do is I actually look at the list of threat models that they have and go through them. So it gives me an idea of how they think about security in the organization, what their security posture is like, what your appetite for risk is. It gives me a great idea of that, so I can help push that forward that way. And when you have the documentation, you can actually share that information with security researchers. So I remember a time at Segment, we rewrote our authentication service, and we made a lot of assumptions during the threat modeling process. And we weren't fully confident if those assumptions were valid or not. So we brought in a third-party vendor. They took the code, they took a threat model, and they pen tested it. And the assumptions were correct. So it was great using those third parties to do it. I have some trusted security researchers in our bug bounty that I don't mind sharing threat models as well, getting to make sure those assumptions are correct and there are no gaps in how we thought about the problem itself. So you can definitely use that for making sure that the things that you do are actually correct. One thing that I want to talk about is application security program maturity in itself. This is not an official framework. This is what I do to sort of assess maturity of companies. Every time I go into a company, I sort of want to understand what bucket they fall into. So I have a no or low maturity, foundational, scaled, and bleeding edge. And it can be broken down to the entire AppSec program, or you can do it to the individual ones. The security review, it might be foundational, your vulnerability management might be no, so it could be broken down that way. It's just a guidance for me on how I think about particular programs and what do those actually mean. So when you think about no maturity, obviously you don't have anything in place, or worse, you have something that actually is destructive and cause harm to the engineering teams. I've been in a lot of companies where the programs were full of friction and engineering didn't want to engage with us. Foundational, when you think of it, it's a lot more ad hoc. Foundational vulnerability management program, you get developers to fix vulnerabilities, but you're chasing them. Or when you're looking at tools, security tools that you have, they're somewhat integrated into their ecosystem, but you're not really leveraging it to drive impact or change. And you might threat model here and there. So everything is very done ad hoc. It's a lot of focus on fires themselves. When you're thinking about a scaled program, you're really thinking about data and metrics and a strategy in place for those sort of programs in themselves. So data is ingested from all the security tools. You centralize it in a security data lake. You do analysis on the data, and then you focus on which are the classes of vulnerability that you want to tackle itself. That's what you really think. Everything is very strategic in nature, and you think about how you can roll it out across the entire organization. And bleeding edge is similar to a scale program, but you're actually starting to experiment now. You're trying to think about ways you can do things better. So maybe you have a SCA tool, a software composition analysis, looking for vulnerabilities in open source libraries, and you start auto-patching those vulnerabilities. Every time you push to production, everything's auto-patched. All your libraries are latest. Or we're going to be talking about threat modeling. You teach your developers to do threat modeling. That's a bleeding edge type of program. So I'll talk more about why this is important later on. But when you think about self-service threat modeling, you're really in the bleeding edge area. There are a number of things that you should do before you get to the self-service threat modeling. All right. So redefining threat modeling, can we do it better? This is just one way to actually look at and scale your threat modeling program itself. There are a number of other ways. I've chatted with leaders in other large companies, but this one particularly focuses heavily on training. All right. I always like to go back to the problem statement. What actual problem are we trying to solve in itself? And the biggest one is threat modeling is really hard to scale. I've been at a number of organizations. There are only a few folks that actually know how to threat model well, and everyone goes to them. And the challenge is that if the company grows, it's not like the security team is growing as fast as the company, so it's going to be even harder to get time from them. And a lot of that time, that means that development teams get blocked by security. So, and there's a few ways you can solve it. Either the security team kills themselves by trying to threat model all the things. I've seen that happen, and people burn out. That's not a realistic option. Development teams get blocked by security, and that's not great for culture in itself. And the last sort of one is security has to pick and choose which things that they want to threat model, and that's not great for risk. Typically, we see devs getting blocked and security needing to pick and choose what they need to threat model. So not the greatest situation there. Security engineers should be focusing on the most important tasks themselves. It may mean it's threat modeling, but a lot of times it doesn't. I do want my security engineers on my team to focus on remediating full classes of vulnerabilities. We want to build that paved path. We want to make sure that everything is built into the framework. I don't want them to spend time to threat model an internal tool that doesn't really get light of the day. I do want to make sure that they're spending their time wisely in itself. So, and with self-service, that sort of helps with that particular problem. So when we think about self-service threat modeling, engineers will be performing the vast majority of threat modeling sessions themselves. So in my utopian world, they're doing 80% of the threat modeling sessions. And security, I still want them to do about 20%. We want to be able to pick and choose which threat models that we want to do. The engineers won't have to wait for security anymore because they are the ones that are trained. They can jump and dive in there. So, and that means that the security team has to really focus on training in itself. So new people join the organization, they get the current trainings that are available there. But the old people that are at their company, you want to make sure that you're developing new trainings for them. So the 200, 300, 400 level trainings in itself. And it's a great methodology to, for security to scale with any size organization. If you taught the engineers how to do threat modeling, it doesn't matter if you have 100 engineers or 10,000 engineers, all of them will be able to do threat modeling, and you can scale with any size in itself. My goal has always been to create mini security engineers within the organization. So if they know what security cares about, they're going to actually report things back to you. And guess what? They have an incentive. They found those vulnerabilities or the issues or risks. They have incentive. They found it. They want to fix it. That's what developers like doing. So you want to create those mini security engineers so that they are incentivized to actually do more security-related items. I personally believe this centralized security model is dead. It means that security teams should not be the security team should not make all of the security decisions for the organization. I do want the right risk owners and people that actually know the most about their areas to make the right security decisions. And I've seen that work at a number of companies that I've been at. All right, how does it solve our problems? So we talked about threat modeling is hard to scale. Well, if engineers are trained to do threat modeling, it's not going to be hard to scale. Everyone is trained. That means that they can actually do the threat models themselves. Will engineers be blocked by security? Well, engineers no longer have to wait for security for doing those threat models, so they'll no longer be blocked. And security engineers can focus on their most critical of tasks as well. So does that mean that it is vacation time? Not just yet. We should talk about some of the things that self-service threat modeling is not. And some of it is that it doesn't mean that security is no longer involved in threat modeling. There are going to be some very hairy systems that you want to make sure that you're still a part of. I want to make sure that I'm involved with authentication, authorization, PHI, internet-facing services. Those are things that I really deeply care about, things that can help you an incident occur. So I want to be involved in those, making sure that we have the right security eyes on that. Things are going to go wrong. Developers are going to miss things, and that's okay. You want to better understand what the root cause is. Is the training not robust enough to actually teach developers all of the things? Then you fix up your trainings. Did the developer just not think about that? Then you may have to just put that particular individual through more sessions. So it's not a shame and blame type of situation. We want to understand what the root cause is so that you can help folks and make sure that they don't make those mistakes again. And last thing, people always worry, does that mean that security folks are out of a job? Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that we're out of a job. It means that one of our responsibilities is taken over. We know that 2 more will pop up, just like a hydra. Okay, let's go deep into the program and make sure that we all are on the same page there. How does this actually work? First and foremost, you need to get buy-in. It's a fairly intensive program in itself, and you want to make sure that you actually sell it to the right stakeholders. So when I went to leadership, I told them about the vision, the plan. I actually told them that it's actually not a very heavy lift from the engineering side. It's not too much time that they will have to put in. And I talked about a lot of key benefits. Higher development velocity will happen with self-service threat modeling. If we are threat modeling all of the things, that means there are going to be fewer vulnerabilities discovered. If there are fewer vulnerabilities discovered, that also means that less time that the development team is actually fixing security issues. And also, by not waiting for the security team to review the changes, that also increases development velocity as well. So, and I mentioned before, there's minimal engineering time required. And I'll talk a little bit more what that means, but there's very, very little additional time required for the engineering team in itself. 4 phases of the program. I mentioned sort of it's a training-heavy program itself. Training, observation, review. In my mind, those 3 are actually still training phases, but different versions of the training phases. And the last one's security optional, where you get to pick and choose which threat model you want to be part of. And it's really about just how you learn. You want to get trained first. Observation, you get a little bit of hands-on support from engineering. Review is that we're trying to see if you can do it on your own. Let's dive a little bit deeper. So when it comes to the training phase, you really have to make sure that engineers know how to threat model, so that you actually teach them what threat modeling is in itself. A few things that I do is I have some principles for training itself. I'm not too sure if everyone's the same way as me, but I learn a lot more when I'm actually engaged with the content itself. It has to be fun, it has to be engaging, and you want the engineers to want to come to these sessions itself. So make the sessions interactive, make sure that you have a lot of questions for the group, make sure that groups are small so that people are not afraid to ask questions. I loved having between 8 and 10 folks in itself. Going through the trainings, I dove deep. People were asking all sorts of questions. That's how they learned, that's how I learned it as well. Next principle is security is a marathon and not a sprint. So you don't have to deliver all the trainings at one go. These are employees. Most of them will stay on for longer than how long the trainings last. So don't be afraid to spread things out. And last thing is I usually talk about teaching engineers things that are relevant to your business. So at Segment, some of the things that we did was we actually did threat models, and we used Stride as how we discovered risks and vulnerabilities in our ecosystem. But that's not necessarily what you have to do. You just want to make sure that you're building a framework that fits well with how you do things at work. You want to reduce the amount of friction as a part of this particular process. So if you do risk assessments, teach engineers how to do risk assessments. If you do Stride, teach the engineers how to do Stride. Incorporate your threat modeling into the workflow. Don't force them to create data flow diagrams. That doesn't make sense. If they're just making architectural diagrams, you don't need to add more friction to the system. They're going to want to abandon that process and workflow. The goal of the training is to teach people how they can retain most of the information. Some takeaways: be patient. It takes years for security folks to get good at threat modeling. I know it took me a long time. I was from the development sphere before I moved over to security, and as a developer, I only think about happy paths. It took me a long time to think about how do I break things, so be patient with the engineers themselves. Training also fit on how people learn. So the first example that I run through when I do threat modeling is how do you secure a house? People think about that. People think a lot about their physical safety. They might not think about software safety, but they do think about a lot of physical safety. And then we're able to sort of roll that into how we think about software itself. So make sure that you take it to them where they can actually understand. Also, I learned a lot with actual hands-on practice when I was learning threat modeling. So I have a lot of different examples that folks can roll through as a part of it. So we got our hands really, really deep with that. And one thing that I found that worked out really great, we used Zoom. So through some of these exercises, I created breakout rooms. So there were smaller breakout rooms, 4 or 5 people in each of them. And they were able to have conversations with one another. Having conversations with their peer just helped instill a lot of the learnings that they had as part of the trainings itself. One thing that I was bad at, it was failing fast. It took me a while to sort of come up with the content, and I still kept on tweaking it before I rolled it out to the engineering team. And when I rolled it out to the engineering team and got feedback, I realized I should have rolled it out a little bit sooner. So rolling it out twice, rolled it out, iterated, rolled it out again, got feedback, iterated again. I was 96% of the way there. So whenever you do any sort of program, fail fast, get information from the people that are leveraging it, iterate from there. And it's always tricky. A lot of us are still fairly remote, especially on the security side. So I had a hard time training over Zoom. There are some hints that I give you. I try to force people to keep their video on. Sometimes people couldn't for whatever reason, but I forced everyone else. And I also made sure that I asked other people questions. And I warned them at the beginning that, hey, I'm going to be a little bit of a jerk. I'm going to ask random questions to random people, especially if I haven't heard from them. And people are on their toes. They want to make sure that they're there when I ask questions. One of my friends, he told me after the training, he's like, Jeevan, I held it in for an hour because I wasn't sure. I knew that as soon as I went to the washroom, you're going to ask me a question. So keep people on their toes. One thing I should also note, all the trainings are open sourced. You can find them, and I'll give a link towards the end. There's at least a few dozen companies that are leveraging those slides. So I'll provide a link towards the end there. Again, trainings have to be engaging. Got a lot of great feedback. Even at joining Rippling, we hired one of my former colleagues, and first thing he's like, Jeevan, you're here. I loved your threat modeling training. So I'm glad that they still remembered, and they still enjoyed that much. That was the first thing that they said to me. So make sure that it is fun and engaging. You'll have a lot of people that will remember it for a long time. And one of my favorite things is not just securing the current company I'm at, being able to secure other companies as well. It's a shared responsibility that we have. Like, we want to make sure that we're teaching our engineering folks how to think about security so they go on and still become good security champions elsewhere. All right. I'll leave that up for a second. And the next phase is observation. So this is where we take a seat back. We let engineers take the lead on this. We let them make sure that they go and put the documentation together, they put the meetings together themselves, and then we want them to run the meeting. They have to discover the assets, they have to figure out the risks of the assets, they need to understand how to prioritize those risks, and they have to figure out which ones that they want to remediate. So you'll have a DRI, a directly responsible individual, that does all of this, puts all that together. And you don't want them to, again, the amount of effort that they require is very minimal. It might add another half an hour to a regular threat modeling session for them to organize all these things. And the goal is really to get those folks to be good enough to do threat modeling on their own. And so a part of those sessions, the things that I made sure of is that I never told them where the vulnerabilities are. I coached them. If I noticed there was a critical one that they're missing, I'd ask questions like, how about this particular system? Are we thinking about all of the ways that authentication happens there? Could there be a possibility for elevation of privilege here? So ask them and hint towards it, but don't tell them the answer. They have to figure it out for themselves. And you need to make sure that every engineer should leave the threat modeling session as that they learned something. When they have that sort of feeling, they'll want to do that again themselves. And once you start noticing that they find all of the critical and high vulnerabilities, you know that the program is working, and then you can move them over to the next stage, which is the review phase. All right, some of the takeaways. Again, your job is to get them a place where they are doing it for themselves. And one of the things I love doing is that at the beginning, I spent a lot of time one-on-one with the engineers, the DRIs that were responsible for it. So I walked them through the process, told them what their responsibilities are, what our responsibilities are, and I made sure that while I'm there, I'm a bit of a salesman. I want to sell security, sell threat modeling, why this is important for them. So they just really want to do it themselves. Another thing I learned was threat modeling is a team sport. So you got to make sure that you have the right people in the room. Don't have smaller threat modeling sessions. It's an opportunity for other engineers on their team to actually learn about threat modeling as well. So you don't want to have 2 people and security. Make sure there's that 4 or 5 on the engineering side and maybe 1 or 2 on the security side itself. And I always hit people up afterwards. And I always tell them that they did a great job. With them leading it, they took a lot of work off of my plate. They set up all this stuff themselves. I didn't have to do that. I'm very happy that they did that. But if you notice gaps as a part of it, tell them that they did a wonderful job. Talk about the gaps that they did and how they can fix that going forward. So every opportunity you interact with them is an opportunity for them to learn and grow themselves. And one particular engineer was pretty ridiculous at it. I sat with them before the session. I talked about what my expectations for them is. I actually had a conflicting meeting at the halfway mark, and I was very comfortable leaving the group to do their thing, just because he challenging everyone. People weren't talking, so he called them out and said, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. What are other risks that you think about? What do you think about these particular prioritization?" So a lot of folks get really, really good at it. Not just one individual, it was a number of folks that got really good at it. The last sort of training phase is the review phase. So this is the end-to-end responsibility for engineers at this point. Again, I'm going to go back to sort of like the threat modeling basics. They're going to schedule the meeting. They have the appropriate documentation that they're going to put together. They're going to look for assets. They're going to discover risks to those assets. They're going to prioritize those risks and figure out which ones to remediate. They only got here because we trust them that they can find all the critical and high vulnerabilities themselves. And in this particular phase, security is not there. We're not in the room. Our job is to review the artifacts themselves. And what I've noticed is I ran into this situation because people are like me. I don't read the instructions. So they got the documentation. They filled out the entire threat model. And during the threat modeling session where we were invited, I'm like, "Oh, you guys already did all the work." It was fantastic. There were times that those engineers found things that would be impossible for security to find just because they know their systems so much better than we do. So it just reinforced the idea this is the right way of doing things. All right, last phase, security optional. This is utopia. So everything should be threat modeled at this stage. Security is only involved in the most sensitive of threat models. Again, authentication, authorization, PHI, internet facing, whatever it is, wherever the crown jewels are in your company, you want to be involved with those particular ones. But you want engineers to do the rest of things. And at this point, you want to see a number of vulnerabilities discovered by third parties, your bug bounty, pen testing, all that sort of start dropping over time. And hopefully your researchers get disenfranchised, your bug bounty researchers get disenfranchised, and you have to start paying a lot more for the bounties themselves. So one of the things that we saw at Segment was the number of findings in our pen testing reports went down considerably. So we typically have 2-3 weeks for a number of vendors to add a number of security researchers on their on the engagement, and that over time things start getting better and better. It was really hard for folks to find vulnerabilities. So you can actually kick up your feet for reals this time in the security optional phase. All right, we're going to talk about program learnings. What are the pros and cons of the program? There are a lot of great things. There are some challenges that we had. I'm a security engineer. I like talking about problems first. The biggest one is this is a multi-year program. I'm going to say it again. It's a multi-year program. That means there's a significant amount of investment that needs to be made by your security engineering org. Not many people last multi-years in a company, so you need to make sure that you build resiliency within the program itself. You got to make sure that there's more than one person sort of leading the program. There are a lot more trainers. So I'll talk a little bit about in the scaling side, but I was the main DRI for this program, and I trained 80% of the folks at Segment, and it really burnt me out. I spent a whole quarter not training folks after the fact because I was so sick of that training. I must have rolled it out maybe 80 times during that session. And training is hard for a number of reasons. I talked about burning folks out. Make sure that, again, build resiliency in, have a lot of trainers as a part of it. But I don't know if anyone else has rolled out someone else's training. I've done that in my past. It is the worst. The trainings is built in someone else's voice, someone else's mindset. So I hated doing that. The way that you solve that is you make sure that you make a duplicate copy of the trainings and you let other people own that training. Have them modify it to their voice. Have them modify it how they think. The vast majority of the training is going to be still the same, but it's going to be done by them in itself, and they have a sense of ownership then as well. You still have the regular threat modeling challenges. So, where do you put all of your threat modeling documentation? Is it centralized or is it distributed throughout the entire organization? Are engineers threat modeling all the things? You have to still have the strong threat modeling security view culture in itself. Otherwise, these problems will continue to persist. Threat models go stale. Are people re-reviewing those threat models? So all those still challenges that you have in the past, they're still there. This program was really hard to scale. Segment was pretty easy. It was 150, 200 engineers. I trained 80% of them myself. No problem. But when we got acquired by Twilio, this is one of the programs that I definitely wanted to roll out at Twilio, and I struggled with it. There are, at the time, maybe 2,000, 2,500 engineers. Going from 200 engineers to 2,500 engineers, it's a big difference. And I didn't want to do this all full-time as well. So one of the things that we discovered towards the end of my tenure at Twilio is that we want to tie threat modeling training, or just security training, to Security Champions program in itself. So we would have a list of things that Security Champions need to do before we officially call them as Security Champions. And the last item was that they have to train other engineers. So that sort of helps with the training the trainers, that next level. So they'll get their stamp of Security Champions once they've actually trained another group of folks themselves. So a great way to make sure that you have a strong pool of candidates there. That's what I'm going to do at Rippling. Last part is it's really hard to maintain a good ratio of people that are trained. So a lot of people, unfortunately, trained people leave the organization. I've asked the company that they can't leave until they train someone else, but that wasn't legal apparently. And then a lot of people join the organization as well, so you have to make sure that you're constantly rolling out trainings itself. I'm going to show this slide one more time. So the other challenge that I had was you have to be scaled already. You have to know the number of features that are being rolled out, which ones are being threat modeled, which ones are not being threat modeled. Once you have a real strong culture of security reviews threat modeling, then it's a lot easier to get into the bleeding edge, sort of the self-service threat modeling program in itself. Mostly because if you're in a foundation that you're doing things ad hoc, that culture is not built. That muscle for engineering is not built just yet. So you really have to do that well before you get to that next phase. Okay, let's talk about some of the wins. Threat modeling happened way more often. It happened way, way more often because it was easy, it was digestible, and engineering was not afraid of it anymore. They just understood, like, we're just asking a few questions about the system itself. So it was done a lot more often. Truthfully, engineers are way better than security engineers at threat modeling their systems. They know their systems really well. I couldn't get into it nearly as deep as they would. I didn't understand the tiny, tiny parts of their systems. It would literally take me weeks or months to actually understand their systems to be able to find all of those dead bodies. But they know their systems really, really, really well. So once you actually tune them to understand what we're looking for, they're going to provide those details themselves. Engineers also don't have to be perfect. They just need to find the critical highs. They don't need to find the mediums and lows. Most organizations are not even fixing criticals. So if they discover criticals as part of the design phase, they're already fixing these vulnerabilities before they write a single line of code. So you're good to go from that standpoint. Another thing that I noticed, we really rolled this out at the beginning of COVID. 2020 to 2022 was our prime time where we were rolling this out. Security culture improved leaps and bounds. And a lot more folks were reaching out to the security engineer team. We're getting DM'd a lot more. Our security channel in Slack was a lot more active. And there was a lot more when it comes to them asking questions, but them also answering questions. You had other engineers answering security questions for other engineers. So security culture was fantastic. And I think my favorite story as a part of this was we were a heavy Node shop at Segment. And one time Node dropped a patch for a high vulnerability. And one of the particular engineering managers, he was East Coast. A lot of the security folks were West Coast. And before we even woke up, he discovered that there was a high vulnerability patch available. He patched his system, figured out there were 2 more places where there needed to be patches. He DM'd those engineering managers who were also East Coast, and later that day they patched those as well. This is all before security woke up. So the amount of care for security went through the roof at Segment. And I'm going to repeat again, failing fast was critical to rapid improvements. So we fail fast with the trainings, we fail fast with the process. We learned a lot more when we got it into the hands of the engineers themselves. All right, resources, how do y'all get started? Okay, I'll leave this up for a second. I have a blog post that I posted a while ago about this. The training sides are the second link. I'm not kidding when I say there's at least a few dozen companies that are already using those slides. The whole point of us sharing is that so you all don't have to start from scratch. This is not proprietary information. Everyone knows about threat modeling and how to think about threat modeling. So what it makes sense is that every organization take a look at it, take the things that work, throw out the things that don't work, and then talk about it. And we're all a community. It's all our job to make all of our companies' software a lot safer. So whatever doesn't work, share it back. Tell the community, this is how we did things. Not everything is perfect. I want you all to iterate and make this better so I can steal from your ideas as well. Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn as well. I've talked to many, many companies about how we actually rolled it out, the different type of challenges that we ran into. So yeah, definitely don't be afraid to hit me up around that. I'm not much on Twitter. LinkedIn is probably a lot better if you want to hit me up. Okay, there was supposed to be one more slide. The last slide was around what can you do. First few weeks, have a look to see where you fall in for the maturity model. If you're in the scaled, if you have a good idea of how many threat models do, what percentage of them are actually being threat modeled, it's a good opportunity to sort of do some bleeding edge items. So take a look at the slides, train some of your champions on it, and then work with them to do threat modeling, have them lead the threat modeling sessions themselves. So after 9 months, have them fully do it, see what type of, how well they're doing it themselves, review the artifacts. But if you're not in the scaled, and if you're looking to work up towards being scaled and bleeding edge, start understanding what it takes to be scaled. Understand how many features are actually getting threat modeled and not. And it's okay if you're starting at like 2%, only 2% of the features. When you can establish that baseline, you can work up and iterate on it itself. So, all right, that's the end of the talk. We still have maybe 10-ish minutes for questions. All right, if anyone has questions, there are a couple of mics. Just come up to the mics. All right. Perfect. Feel free, ask away.
Hi, Jeevan. Thank you so much for this talk. I just have a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to understand when you try to implement this in a couple of the companies that you mentioned, one thing again I'm assuming was that existing or how you tackle that, if you can expand a little bit more on that, is I think one of the basics, if I'm when I'm thinking and applying my AppSec knowledge here, is there has to be a priority framework for all the features and applications established or some level of maturity there to make this success, to determine what should go in self-serve, what should not. And I think second aspect, where I was actually wondering, maybe you will cover it, but I didn't see that mentioned anywhere, is the leadership training here. Because none of this can actually, you can do all the scaling and everything, but none of this will work if there is no risk acceptance and understanding of what can be achieved with this from leadership, right?
Okay.
Because there has to be, where does the responsibility fall, for example, when a self-serve model is getting happen versus a non-self-serve, right? Versus SMEs involved. So if leadership is not trained, those things are very difficult to do, investigate in post-mortem.
Let me answer the second one because I forgot the first question already. Apologies. The second one about leadership and training itself. We had not only did we have a self-service threat modeling process, we had a self-service vulnerability management process as well. So we had leadership buy-in right from the get-go that security doesn't own risk, they own risk. And when they understand that they own risk, they actually cared a lot more about it. An example of that is that we had part of our self-service vulnerability management program, our job as security was to make sure that all the vulnerabilities were within SLA. Engineering responsibility is either fix it or ask for an SLA extension. And when they ask for an SLA extension, if it's a P4, P5, it gets automatically approved. P3s went to directors, P2 went to VPs, and P1s went to SVPs. One particular time, VP came, he had already approved one extension, another one came, so it's a high vulnerability. And he's like, wait a second, I've already approved this, why are you asking for another extension? And they said, we didn't fix it. He's like, listen, if something gets popped and my name was on it, they're going to blame me for this. So if you're going to ask for another extension, I need to know who's going to do it, how long it's going to take, and what the actual plan is to actually remediate it. So they provided them that information. They said it's going to take 6 weeks. They fixed it in a week and a half because no one was going back to them. So you really need to make sure that the risk owners actually own the risk, and then there's focus for them to actually want to remediate things. What was the first question?
The majority of prioritization of the applications in organizations.
Right, for sure. So as a part of any of my programs, I need to understand what the business thinks about what are their biggest assets. So I want to make sure that I spend, like if we are breaking it down from P0 to P5 teams or products, I want to make sure that 100% of the time my team is involved with the P0, P1 products, and we're threat modeling every feature. We know exactly what's going out. For the other ones, then it starts like the percentage starts dropping. By the time it gets to P5, I don't think I really care. I don't think the company even cares. But like you want to make sure that you're really focusing on the priorities. In order to do that, you have to actually get things defined. How do you define what is the priority? I want data and metrics to sort of define that itself. I think you were up next.
Thank you very much for the presentation. In my experience, threat modeling is very comprehensive, right? So you look at not just the vulnerabilities, but data security and all kinds of other things as well. So it's not just vulnerabilities that we will see coming down in production. So how do you actually show the value of doing threat modeling, right? If there's no specific risk vector that's coming down in production. That's question number one, if you want to answer.
Yeah, so the question is around impact. How do you actually show impact? It's always the worst where like you have DevX teams that no one cares about them while they're pushing things to production. Everything is fine. The moment something goes wrong, everyone's yelling at them. Same with security. Everything is fine until you have a breach, and then everyone's yelling at security. So again, I sort of sold this program to leadership from a development velocity standpoint. We talked about things are going to move. We were challenging engineering teams that they have to threat model just about everything, and we were delaying them, adding friction to the process. And we talked about removing that friction in itself. So we already had that buy-in from business that this is already important to do. They understood the importance of it and the value that our customers, particularly Segment, were mostly enterprise-facing customers, and why it was good there. So the buy-in from the leadership level was easy just because they understood the importance of security in itself. I don't know if I really answered the question.
Yeah, I think so. The other question I had was, when engineers are doing threat modeling themselves, isn't there a disincentive for them to find something, right? Because they are, at the end of the day, incentivized for delivery, right? So would they find something that's like a high risk and block themselves and not be able to
I love that question. So you have to optimize for the right incentives. So one of the incentives that we had as part of Segment, and we actually rolled it out at Rippling as well, as part of the career ladders, there is a capability around security. So at the staff, principal, senior principal level, there's an expectation that you're good at security in itself. So when you have calibration sessions, when we're actually looking at performance reviews across the entire organization, security is a part of it. And we will call out the ones that we think that they're not good security partners themselves.
I just want to say thank you. And then the gentleman kind of stole my first question, which was around the metrics and the value add and that proposition.
Yeah.
You can get senior management buying in and it's spending these resources on threat modeling,
Yep.
but then you need to show that it worked and
Yeah.
it's value add, and how you do that I still think is a little fuzzy.
Yeah, so again, they had already bought into the threat modeling concept in itself. And with the self-service, is really about the velocity and how fast development works. That was the engineering side. On the security side, we sort of talked about, we do expect the number of vulnerabilities to creep down. And we did notice that in our bug bounty program, we're having fewer low and medium priority vulnerabilities. And critical and highs were always difficult at Segment, just because how we had a pretty ridiculous security ratio. It was one security engineer for 12 developers. So we were already really, really good with the critical and highs in itself, but we did notice a bit of a difference when it came to the number of vulnerabilities found per capita, because we kept on growing the team. I wanted to make sure that they knew how many vulnerabilities by the number of people that were on the team. Thank you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. And my question was really like, we all fix vulnerability in critical and high, whatever, right? How does that fall into, if you're in a specific industry, how would you tackle, I feel like we just run scans on the code and they hear vulnerability, we fix them, but how does that affect, if you're in a specific industry, you might be, certain things might be targeted on this particular industry, such as advanced persistence threat.
Yeah.
How do you fall into that? I don't have that information.
Yeah, it really has to be buy-in from the top. And I really love what Satya has said at Microsoft recently. EVPs, bonuses are going to be tied to how well they do security. So you have to really incentivize the leadership to actually care about security itself. I joined Rippling for that reason as well. I've worked with the CTO there. I know how much the CTO cares about security. And it makes it really easy when you have the leadership care. We always force change downwards. I love doing both sides where you have champions and you care about the individual engineers and really evangelize them to care about security. But you also need that top-down pressure as well. Yeah,
Okay.
we're good.
All right.
I'm so sorry. We have to cut off the questions, but I'm sure you can answer more in the hallway if you have, so we got to clear out for the next room. Thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you to our presenter for a great presentation.